Subscribing, right? Just a reminder for everyone, these calls are recorded, so um, yeah. Uh, Everything you say will find itself on YouTube. um, and with that, let's figure out the date for the next call. So Thursday, 2 weeks from now, is a holiday here, and I'm guessing also elsewhere, probably. Um, so, do folks have um, on Tuesday on that week? So May 28th. Would that work for folks? Same time as now, or if I remember correctly, Todd has a conflict on Tuesday, so maybe we can make it 2 hours earlier. So
So 27th is a holiday in the US, but I guess 28th should be okay.
yeah, but you're saying 28th on 9 a.m. would be
28th at 9 a.m. might be tricky for some folks because it'll be after a long weekend.
yeah. So maybe 28th and keep it the same time. And
Yeah, so 11 a.m. PST on 28th.
yes, that's what I'm proposing. Is that okay with folks? Going once, going twice. 28th, it is.
Yeah, and that will be a design call, correct?
And that would be a design call. I will set up the agenda after this and try to gather up proposals to discuss.
There's a Mozilla conflict.
Oh,
Sorry, I keep finding it. There's a Mozilla conflict at that time.
On the 28th, okay. We do have the, I guess, face-to-face on the 11th. It would be nice to maybe get another sync before then.
Yeah.
Could we consider 29th or 30th? I guess you ruled out 30th, right?
30th is problematic. 29th, it would have to be a bit later for me. But it's feasible. So I would say 1 p.m. PST, if that works.
That's cool.
Okay.
So 1 p.m. PST on 29th, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
A tricky week with holidays on both ends in different parts of the world. Okay. So with that, let's start by talking about the face-to-face, maybe before HR time. So regarding the face-to-face, we have a date, June 11th. We have a room for the full day in the Google Mountain View office. If you folks can be there or can't, generally I send out the registration form. It's also linked from the agenda. If you can make it or can't make it, please let me know. I wanted to set up an agenda doc before this call, but I will set up an agenda doc, and then it would be great to start collecting ideas regarding various proposals or various web performance related needs that you want to discuss during the call. I think it would be particularly interesting for industry folks to speak a bit about their current challenges and what this group can do better to address them. So I'll set up a document, link to it from here, and then I'd love to have some ideas from you up there. I think that the call can generally focus more on new proposals and higher level themes rather than just issue triage, because going over the issues today, it seems like that on the issue front, what we need is more work and less this like we don't need decision. We need to actually move forward with things. So yeah, but we'll discuss that in a bit. Any questions regarding the face to face? Any comments?
I know that it is a face to face, but will there be any possibility for remote?
I hope so. Yeah, the form also includes like an option of I can participate remotely. I will figure out with the logistics folks if remote participation will be. I'm guessing we can enable it anyway with using laptops, but I'm hoping that the room will facilitate something better than that. But I'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Also, just to add to what Yov was saying, we also have a number of people on the call from kind of industry representing various large properties. But if you know any others that might be good to hear from in terms of what the needs are, in terms of what performance, what the gaps are, we'd love to get them to, even if they can dial in and just present and talk about what the group should be thinking about. I'd love to use this face-to-face as more of a future looking as opposed to down in the weeds and debating the things that we've already been debating. So if you have any leads for who those people could be or should be, either maybe send them a link to this or ping us and maybe we'll reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to present.
Yeah. Philippe, from just like from a process perspective, is there like, can we have non-members present, or should we?
You can we can have guests or observers. I mean, as usual, if they're starting to make technical contribution, then the IP question comes into play.
Yeah, but if it's not a technical contribution, but just talking about use cases, so
that's fine.
Okay, cool. So
it's no different than having an observer at TPAC.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, and with that, let's talk about HR time, because I believe we have closed the last of the issues.
Yeah,
and
I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
So let me try to make a last attempt, and you guys feel free to shoot me down quickly. So, I mean, we all know that the state of privacy on the web has been an ongoing concern, and it's been growing more and more lately. So high resolution time with this low resolution timer allows for more fingerprinting substantially. And right now the specs is vague about well, this is the lowest resolution that you must provide. It basically leaves a lot of door open to implementation. But it also means that if implementation wants to put more privacy for their users, it's basically right now kind of like an open window where we don't really recommend what to do, whether basically you should not have a low resolution and use the same resolution as a data object in JavaScript, or whether you should put the whole things behind a feature policy and or a permission API and whether, and if you're going to do that, this is how you should do it. So I know that most of the implementers around this table are not really interested in doing that. The question is more like, well, if you wanted to do it, what would be the best way of doing it? And is there anything that we can point people towards to in the specification?
So first of all, I'd like to reject the premise that it enables more fingerprinting. I don't think that this is a genuine concern. I think that the general concern with high resolution timers is not really around fingerprinting, but around data linkage, which is yes something that we have addressed. I've also recently, following Mozilla's comments, added a list of potential mitigations by implementation. So not just coursing, but also jitter, as well as at least one more thing that I will remember in a minute. But basically, there was a proposal to mandate a permission API. That proposal did not get any traction from any of the implementers. I also don't think that proposal is particularly web compatible. At the same time, browsers that are privacy focused can coarsen that API to whatever level that they see fit, or jitter it, or if they are willing to take the compatibility hit, they are free to put it behind a permission flag, or somehow otherwise limit it in third-party context, even though I would claim that it doesn't really make sense because it's irrelevant to the threat model, but they could. Nothing is preventing implementers who wish to do all those things to do them. I don't think that any of those implementers are currently on the call, or part of that group in general. But they are free to do that. What would you like to see us add to the spec that would, that would make that would make it easier for such implementers to do whatever it is that they want to do?
So you were doing great until you said if they're willing to take the compatibility hit. So you're right. The added jitter is in the spec already. We have a clock resolution section in the spec, and that's fine. The content, I think, is kind of like, well, so if you don't want to give any data, what should you do? Should you basically only support the old API and not report any timing entry at all? And would that be considered to be against the specification to not report a navigation timing entry in the performance timeline? Or is it something else? So the question is kind of like, here is a question for you. So is it okay to not report a navigation timing entry in the performance timeline?
If you choose not to implement navigation timing, sure.
I don't quite follow that question, because what is the leap from high resolution time to navigation timing?
So any of the data that can leak high resolution time, it's basically we're leaking high resolution times around our timing entries in the timeline.
Sure, but the implementation can choose to apply any of the methods that you have mentioned to coarsen the granularity, jitter, do whatever they need to do. So as a concrete example, Safari chooses to throttle, or clamp, I guess, not throttle, the resolution to 1 second, which is equivalent to what you get from date today.
1 millisecond, but 1 millisecond.
Sorry, 1 millisecond.
And I think that's fine. I just wondering, is it okay for an implementation to not report any timing entry in the timeline? when you would say, give me the navigation timing and performance and tree, and it would not give you anything.
So they would claim to support navigation timing, but give back no times?
Yes.
I think that seems like a higher meta level question, not specific to HR time. Claiming to support navigation timing while not exposing navigation timing seems like a contradiction to me. So it's more a question of like...
Not exactly, because navigation timing, unlike resource timing, we have some old interface there. So in other words, you can get to the performance timing entry without using the performance observer interfaces that we have.
That's not really, like, it's... How you get to that information is not really relevant. If you don't want to expose that information, you can say, I don't expose anything that like, if you want to say, my browser doesn't support HR time, rather than just clamp it to the same value as date.now, I am not supporting it at all, then you can not support, like, all of the APIs that rely on that. Claiming that you support them and then provide 0 entries for everything, I don't see why you would do that.
So why did you say there would be a compatibility hit?
If they choose not to, like, there can be web pages out there that don't test if performance.now is implemented before relying on that value not being not a number or undefined. There can be, there can be web pages out there that rely on that value to return a non-zero value, and barring that behind a permission, like, also the API shape doesn't really allow itself to be because it's a synchronous API. It's not a promise-based API. So it doesn't really allow itself to be amenable to permissions. And that's an API that is already shipped and out there. We cannot change it now. So I would love to understand what kind of privacy protections can't coursing to the same level that date.now has been exposing since forever, and that they don't necessarily contest, will give them. Let's say you just alias performance.now to date.now. What would further, like, which is basically what Apple are doing, what Safari is doing.
Actually, that wouldn't be spec compliant.
That is true, because yes, if the clock changes, then yes. But same granularity and same, yeah.
Well, so the thing is, right now the API allow you to access to resource and navigation timing information that the date object just doesn't give you.
The HR time doesn't give you that. Resource timing and navigation timing give you that. HR time is something they rely on.
The resolution from HR time, right?
Yes, HR time is something that those API, if you say I don't support HR time at all, then you shouldn't support anything that relies on HR time. And that may or may not be web compatible. I'm not sure, but
all right. I think you defended the spec quite well. I don't have any more question.
Okay.
Sorry if I wasted a little bit of your time.
No worries. So, with that said, can we move forward? Because from the way, like, we have 0 open issues, we have 2 green implementations, can we ship?
So
Fine
that
by
seems
me.
to pass all of our requirements. So I don't see, unless there's any objections, I don't see why not.
Can I ask a question? What are the changes of HR time 2 with respect to HR time 1?
It's in the status of the document.
Yeah, it's worker. It's exposed in worker as well as exposing the time origin.
Yes, we have a better definition of time in the spec.
Yeah,
So-
okay. Nicholas, if you look at the status of this document,
Yep.
the spec itself, I think it covers the highlights.
Yeah. So just making sure everyone is aware what the changes are before they can actually say
Okay.
yes.
And since we don't have Apple and Microsoft folks in the room, should we send a, I don't know. We explicitly said that we won't have calls for consensus, but maybe we should just send an email to the group.
So this is
Yeah.
advanced to which stage? This is
Proposed recommendation, I would think.
Yeah.
Can we just ping the group and ask for like basically announce that we are moving it and just give people a couple of days to comment?
Yeah.
We don't have any objections. Let's just proceed because if there are no issues, then I believe we're in a good state.
Yeah. I will. Yeah. I'll ping the mailing list and.
Actually, you should give, our charter says, to a fully synchronous decision, we should give 10 working days after the publication of the resolution. So you should record the resolution in the minutes and send it to the public list, and people will have 10 days to object to that resolution if they want to.
Okay. Sounds good. So let's record that this is resolved.
Okay, record it.
Awesome.
AI sends pings to the group.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So otherwise, I've taken a look at our general, went over all the specs that are currently being worked on in the group and just looked at all the open issues. There are a lot of them. Some specs are really close to being in a almost good shape with a small number of open issues. Others have a larger number of open issues. I've been personally driving down the open issues on some of those specs, but I would love to have more folks involved in general, for the specs that have let's say over 10 open issues. A lot of them are things that can be easily most of them are not big issues that require a lot of work, but smaller ones that require some attention and some legwork. So I would love to have more people participating in that
We should have the different editors
process.
assigned to each spec, right? What would be the best way for us to, I guess, engage all the editors? Can we schedule async calls with them and whoever, the people on the related issues and try to drive it down that way?
We could.
I think the problem is
but-
in many cases the editors are no longer super actively working on
In which case, that's probably the first thing that we need to.
that's the problem. Yeah.
So in the list that I'm looking in the agenda, we should probably look at the first level of triage would be to look at who the current editors assigned on the spec are, and then do a scrub for who are the active editors versus moved on editors. identify those spots and then figure out ownership. I guess it's just kind of like a general health check, right, across all the specs. Because
yeah. Yeah, so there are a number of specs where the editors have moved on, and yeah, we need to find new ones, I guess. So if I look at the list,
let's take that as an AI
okay.
for yourself, myself, and Todd to review the list, identify where the gaps are, and then surface to the group where we need help.
Sure.
Maybe on this call we can focus on the subset of specs for whom we do have the editors on the call for.
Sure. So basically, preload and resource hints are on me. If we just look at the list of repos that have more than 10 open issues, so preload and resource hints are on me, and I need to work on that just as soon as I will get performance timeline, resource timing, and navigation timing out the door. Long tasks, I believe also. So we have long tasks and pain timing that I don't know if yeah.
What about Beacon? Beacon doesn't have any open issues.
It does not. No, Beacon is not on the list.
And Beacon is in PR, correct?
No, it's in CR.
Okay.
No, I mean, am I mistaken?
Let me check.
No, it's in CR. I mean, unless it's in CR since April last 2017.
Yeah.
I think the one you were thinking about was the page visibility one.
Yeah. Yes, it is in CR, and we can probably then.
Yeah. Any reasons why we can't?
I think the testing maybe why we can't. Let me see.
Maybe we can take that offline. We don't have to.
Yes,
here with the rest of the group.
Yeah. There is we need to improve the compatibility. Like, we don't have 2 green implementations for Beacon.
That's the problem.
Yes, and that is definitely.
Having said that, looking at WP8FY, it doesn't seem to be so bad.
It's not so bad, but it could be better.
Can always be better.
Yeah, I think that there's also the headers directory that is hiding a bunch of not so green tests. But yeah. We need to improve the compat situation. And otherwise, we have reporting API and network error logging where.
I'm here.
Oh, awesome. Hey, Doug.
So for this one, partly it's that I fell behind over the last couple of months, having shifted from one company to another, but I'm back. And I also recruited one of my former colleagues from Google to sort of help out with triaging and stuff like that. And I think he actually just joined the working group within the last couple of days.
Yeah.
He's planning on attending the face-to-face in June as well. So hopefully over the next week or two, we can sort of go through this backlog here and clear it out a bit. There's also been a relative spate of new open issues just in the last couple of weeks because Mozilla has started looking at this again. And so they opened up some issues just as far as going through the standards position process for it.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So very happy to hear that you're back in business, and yeah, and I think that regarding the other issues, one idea that came up was to have some sort of a hackathon for interested and willing folks to stick around for a day after the face to face and drive down that list and remove some of the low hanging fruits from it. Does that general idea sound like a good idea to folks? And if so, how many of you can actually join one?
Sounds good to me.
I think that's something we should propose on the list and see who is able to stick around. I imagine lots of folks will make a one-day trip or have a plan.
Yeah, I think that for us at Mozilla, I think if it's 2 days, we would be more likely to have 2 people attending, and if it's 1 day, we'd be more likely to have 1 person attending. So I think if there's some work that would actually have to make it work, I think having it right then would be really interesting.
So I'm sorry, but you were I heard you poorly. Is that so from the Mozilla side? If
I can repeat some of what he said.
Okay.
So we have Benjamin in San Francisco. He would attend either way. If it was more than 1 day, we would probably send one more person. Most probably will. Okay. I will not be attending because I'm going to be traveling around that time a lot, and I don't want to add more travel to that.
Okay. So a 2-day event is better than a 1-day event, is what I'm hearing.
Well, if there's enough material to fill.
Okay.
It needs to be worth it for sure.
Yeah, but I
think
think
it's easier to justify flying a person over.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But I think that we'd have enough material to just have folks, divide and conquer the different the different issue lists and trim them down to a substantial extent. So I think that'll be good. Okay, cool. But I'll send a proposal to the list and we'll see how many folks sign up. And cool. Okay, so otherwise, from that long list, I put together some interesting ones to discuss. So, Nicholas, do you want to talk about the supported entry types issue?
Sure. So we're talking about performance timeline issue 117. Basically, the problem is that there was some feedback that it might make sense to do a registration list instead of having a registration hook. So the difference is that with the list, you have all the entry types in performance timeline, and it would be up to the implementer to actually ensure that that list is up to date whenever they implement new entry types. The idea for the registration hook was that having that in the specs would make it easier for implementers to notice when they should be updating supported entry types. However, the registration list more accurately reflects what would be implemented in the code itself, because you will just have a list, right? Generally speaking. So there's divided opinions, and we want to hear from the group what they think is the better approach here.
And from like a practical working group perspective, a registration list would mean that for each new spec that relies on performance timeline, we'd need to change the performance timeline spec, as well as depending on where we put the tests, we may need to ignore. So, for example, if we have a new version of performance timeline, you could have implementations that pass all the tests other than the ones for the entry types that they don't yet support, which then we'll have to manually figure out instead of just, having the failing tests be failing on the not yet implemented spec rather than on the performance timeline spec, if that makes sense.
So I think that's an important point from a strict process perspective, at least with respect to how the group operates today, and Philippe, please jump in here. I don't think this actually works in that we would never be able to ship performance timeline because every new spec that we add would require an update in performance timeline, and we could never ship performance timeline. Like, it would have to be a living spec. Philippe, you're muted.
I double muted myself, sorry. Yeah, that's something, by the way, making performance timeline a living standard is something that we wish we could do starting next year, by the way. So, in the meantime, if the price of having a static list is we have to publish a new version of performance timeline, I think it's feasible.
Sorry, can you repeat the last bit?
I said if we have to update a performance timeline every time we add a new performance entry, I think it's feasible.
When you say it's feasible, do you mean like if we wanted to advance performance timeline through the W3C process, how would that process work today?
We will only include the timing entries that are actually stable enough.
That in itself is an interesting term, stable enough, because the whole premise of the performance timeline is that different user agents may support different entry types at different points in time. So it is not the case that shipping performance timeline means shipping peak timing and other things. Like those are not coupled.
Although, to be fair, performance timeline already relies on user timing in its ideal harness tests. That's kind of a bug, but
yeah, that seems. We have to test performance timeline in some way, and for that we need to use one of the subsets for that. But that's a test issue. The question is kind of like, can we ship a recommendation for performance timeline, which is explicit on which timing entries are being returned, knowing that implementations will vary in which timing entries they return.
Yeah. So I guess one question would be, do we want to do the recommendation change anytime before we actually plan to move it to a living standard? And I guess another question, more like for other browsers, though we only have one other here, it would be, what do they think is better from the spec perspective? Having the list, all the elements in the performance timeline, or having the hook where other specs would add the entry types when they actually mention, like every spec with a new entry type would have to have the additional hook. So any thoughts from Mozilla about this?
I don't have thoughts on it. I don't know enough about the IDL and spec language and so on.
Would it be, because looking at the issue, there are two opposing Mozilla views on it. But also now hearing Philippe, I think that it may be less of an issue than what I initially thought it would be from a process perspective. So maybe we can get away with it up until a point where we actually have a living spec.
If I get away with it, can you elaborate what that means?
I mean that for L2 we will have a registry and performance timeline that some implementations will fail the tests for, but will say it's fine because it's fine. And then for like by the time we'll have like by the time L3 comes around, we'll already have a living standard process to work with.
That some of the, like there isn't a right answer. It's just a set of trade-offs. And I would claim that even if we had a living standard, it is still not an ideal outcome for performance timeline to enumerate all the entries that some browsers may not support. Because it's unclear, like as a developer reading that spec, I would expect that if supported entry lists like 15 different things, then every browser should support 15 different things. But that's not actually the case.
No, Ilya. I mean, I would perfectly expect the spec to say this is all of the possible entries that could be returned, that could be supported. And as a developer, I would have to basically figure out which one is actually supported by the implementation. That's the normal case for a registry.
Fair, yeah, okay.
So you can have can have a note saying, of course, only return the ones you actually support.
Yeah, that's after all, that's the purpose of this.
Now, the other question is, would we still be okay having those tests in the corresponding folders? Because otherwise, it will be annoying to check the greenness of performance timeline if it depends on a bunch of additional strings.
Or we should accept that those like if either we say those tests sit in different directories, or we say that those tests don't apply when we check for greenness of performance, like of the general infrastructure.
Right. Either
those
way,
are the two options.
Would be fine, since it probably would be just a single test that would fail.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and anyway, performance timeline is not going to require implementing any of the underlying performance entries. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's all optional.
Okay, so.
Well, but the test will still test that the strings are there, right?
Yeah, that's why we want to. Yeah, that's what we want to guarantee, that if you're implementing navigation timing, then the entry is called navigation.
Yeah, but it would actually make more sense to have the test as part of the navigation timing directory, so that there we can see if it's red or green.
Yeah, I think we could have it in both, but that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, that would work as well.
So just can I clarify it sounds like long term, if we're looking at a living spec, this could be made to work. In the short term, if we want to advance performance timeline through the process, or do we even care for that? How would we go about it?
Well, we just add a section to say here are all of the possible entries that could be returned by this attribute, and we list each of the.
Sure, and then a month later we come up with a new entry, and what happens then?
We update the editor's draft. We basically freeze. We freeze it at the time as we move to propose recommendation, but it's not like we're adding either a performance entry every month either. I mean, the other solution, the other alternative is to move those entries into a separate working group node that we can update at will, and instead we just give a link to see the list of possible entries. You just look at the working group node. In the past, we used to have a wiki page. We were linking to a wiki page. For some reason, you guys decided not to do that. I don't remember exactly why. Another alternative is to publish a working group node that we can update whenever we want to say those are the list of performance entries we have. It's an indirection. It's one way to avoid having to republish a recommendation every single time we add a new entry.
Okay, so it sounds that, according to Philippe, we shouldn't worry too much about whether this impacts the process of performance timeline or not.
Yes, there are ways to deal with that.
I'm not sure what the right indirection mechanism is, but that seems like a plausible approach to solve this to me. Because I would personally prefer to avoid having enumerate that list and then restart the process. Because that spec will be frozen. People will be looking at outdated versions of it in the W3C tree.
In that case, make it a separate working group node. Put that list in a separate working group nodes that we can update whenever we want.
Okay.
That sounds like, yeah, sounds good to me.
Hey guys, sorry. So I actually carefully read that entire issue, and I'm not sure that anything in that issue has to do with the list that's actually returned. I actually think Boris's and Anna's points are very different from that.
In what way?
Well, I think Boris is actually making some very, abstract's the wrong word, semantic points about is this going to be the exact same object? Is it a different object? Is the ordering identical every time? If so, why isn't that specified?
Sure, but
we're not talking about the issue itself, but rather the way we're solving the issue and the way we're changing the way we specify supported entry types.
Yeah.
As part of the process to solve the issue. So we're more so I do understand the issue is not completely. Yeah, the issue is not that it's a list versus a hook. It's more the final comments about the PR.
Yeah.
How to solve it, and then the suggestion of using a registration list instead of having the hook to register the entry type.
Yeah, so it's just the last three comments that are meaningful for that discussion. The other discussion was already addressed. Like the other concerns from Boris were already addressed.
Right. So we do agree with Boris's concerns. So they are valid, and that's why we sent a PR to fix them. Now we're discussing about this new suggestion of instead of having the hook, so the algorithm register entry type, which would be called from other specs, have the list entirely in performance timeline.
And then having the non-normative link to all of the other specs from performance timeline, which then can be used as a signal from anybody implementing performance timeline that there's things they may want to implement effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're basically saying follow your option one, which Anna says he likes.
Right. It seems that Philippe also likes option one better, and it seems that there's no problems with the process itself. So I can update it to be option one. Although I do have a question about it. For the buffered flag, we also planned to use something similar, like the register entry type, because each entry type must specify whether it's available from the timeline and the maximum size of the buffer. So how should we deal with that?
So I'm guessing we will also need that registry to have that option per spec.
So those will also all go in the I don't understand what it is, in the note or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think that like we want those two things or more things if we'll have more options per spec to go like to have one single mechanism that applies both. So right. I'm guessing we'll need that registry to also say if each spec is or is not available from the performance timeline.
Right, as well as the maximum buffer size.
As well as the maximum buffer size, yes. That was the third thing that I forgot, yeah.
No worries. But okay, that clarifies, thanks.
And I dropped in the chat, by the way, a pointer to something completely that I did 2 months ago for the distributed tracing working group, where they have a protocols registry.
Can you copy that in the minutes? Because
Sure, yes.
Yeah, it will be easier.
Nicholas, just so I can summarize the discussion. Can you recap what we concluded on here?
Right, so we concluded that we're going to change the implementation, and instead of using a registration hook, we will use registration list, which will be in a, I don't know what's the word, in a something
Working
note.
group note.
Right, sorry, thanks. Working group note that can be changed whenever, so that we can actually, so we don't actually have that process problem with performance timeline.
Okay.
In addition, if you want to add, we also want to include in that note the flags for the buffer, so the relevant flags for each entry type regarding to the buffered flag behavior, which are whether it's available from the timeline or not, and the maximum size of the buffer.
Okay, so how about I take an action item to create a first draft of the note? And then you guys can add on top of it. And let's create a repository for that as well, like that it will be done.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
And, sorry, just one more question. What implications does this have for the actual spec? So if I'm writing a new spec with a new entry type, what happens there?
So go ahead.
Sorry, I think the answer is the spec at most has a non-normative note telling you remember to include this in supported entry types. I think we can have non-normative notes in the new spec, so that the implementer is reminded that they should update that, because the normative text will be in performance timeline. But I think that's the idea, right?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Oh, in addition, you'll have the tests to remind you, because we still plan to keep those tests in the corresponding folders.
Yeah.
So if you try to get the test screen, you'll be reminded that you need to implement that. You mean to update that.
Yeah.
Okay. Nicholas or Yov, could one of you then follow up on that email thread as well? Sorry, not email, on the GitHub thread to recap what we concluded here?
Yeah.
Yep, I'll update it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, so with 2 minutes left, I don't think we can go into navigation timing with sign exchanges. But one of the smaller issues that I wanted to talk to Todd about is there's a privacy/security review for server timing. And so you open an issue 61, and I'm not, do you mean as part of the W3C process, so a ping review, a web app stack review, or some other type of privacy and security review for server timing?
I don't know. Let me look at it and remind myself.
Okay.
That's strange. So let's see. Server timing number 61. Privacy security review. This was a W3C privacy security review for the privacy security group.
Okay. Okay, so I will talk to Charlie and try to make sure that he kicks off that particular process.
At TPAC last year, I think is when we made this, said, hey, it looks like that's an important step for the spec.
Yeah. Okay, and yeah, otherwise, I think for server timing, we have almost green with 2 implementations and a few issues left, so I think we're not far off from being able to move it forward. But yeah, it's I think we'd be able to move it to CR shortly. Is the privacy and security review something that should block CR, or just PR.
That should usually block CR.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So I'll talk to Charlie and see if he can kick that off, or I'll kick that off myself. Okay, and otherwise we had a bunch of other issues that I wanted to discuss, but we are out of time. Thank you all so much, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, folks.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Y'all, real quick.
Sure.
Should we schedule a quick just short call for the few of us, or do you guys want to stick to email for how we? I see the notes from earlier on the call.
Yeah, we should definitely.
Sure.
Todd, we can follow up. I think we should definitely do like a minimum a cheers sync to organize the agenda and figure out the logistics.
I agree, and we'll just cruise through it, and then.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Sounds good.
Right.
I'll set it up.
Cool.
If I can
Cheers.
make it, that would be nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.